up to today, most people actually believe that we, the gay community, wake up like in the morning and it's like, okay, today I'm going to be gay. It's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Paperwork is still dad and mom.
Oh, yes.
Father. And
Mother.
I have to end up filling in all the father details.
I don't like to use the word the telling people, because I don't actually do the telling. It's more I lived my life. There's a social group that I'm part of on WhatsApp, and there was a speed dating event, and I'm like, okay, I want to join. And it came to the gender box. Firstly, there was no gender box. And the lady, the most sweetest lady, not homophobic in the slightest. She's like, actually, the event is not LGBT inclusive. You're not going to find an LGBT person in Durban that would be willing to out themselves. I think she was happy. It was a bit of an exaggeration. If she looked hard enough, she would be able to find. But there was a certain level of truth in what she said.
We have been together for the past, I'd say, 14 years now. Married for the past 12 years.
I proposed to her in our townhouse and she said yes. And yeah, we've been together ever since. Yeah, we have a family. We've lived in Gauteng for a while and then we moved to KwaZulu-Natal. So having to kind of fit into those two different provinces was also quite unique because I would say we were much more open in terms.
Free.
Yeah, I think even having the simple things like holding hands were much more easier to do in Gauteng. KwaZulu-Natal is a bit reserved from that point of view, so it made us as well become different people in terms of the way we express our emotions in public.
When one thinks about Indian Durban, I mean, I know first and foremost we think about food, we think about song, we think about costume or dress code. You think about rich culture, expression, and experience. But at the same time, while one wants to acknowledge that you're also thinking about communities where the concept of accepting, loving, and supporting an individual that might identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Yeah, when you think about, is there a gay Indian Durban? Not really.
Durban is harder to come out to for LGBT Indian folk. I've lived in Johannesburg as well as Durban. It's chalk and cheese. There's no comparison. And that's purely a function of our history. The majority of Indian folk are based in Durban. It's your community, it's your family, it's your community members, it's your neighbors. The people you would actually have a concern of judging you are around you. So if you move to another city, there's less judgment. You can be yourself, you can express yourself more. It's easier to be yourself in front of somebody that doesn't know you as opposed to somebody who knows you.
Indians in South Africa arrived quite early on, as opposed to what we generally talk about when it comes to indentured labor. The Dutch colonies over here were the first to bring in Indian slaves from the subcontinent. In the 1800s, once slavery got abolished, the British Empire, they started bringing in indentured laborers on 5-year contracts. A lot of the things were not explained to them and they were given certain false hopes in a way. So they landed up in a foreign country on a different continent with very little, and through that came much of the Indian population that we see in South Africa today. And in fact, Natal, where they were primarily brought in because of the plantations over there, has one of the largest Indian populations anywhere outside India today. And that is primarily in the city of Durban.
Indian South African culture comes in two main parts. One is the overt part, the part you would see on TV or the media in terms of the cultural practices, the rituals, and so forth, the dressing, the visual part. And then the second branch, I would say, is the internal culture, if I could so to speak, the expectations. We tend to value education to an exceptionally high degree. From what I understand, education for non-white folk was given less funding, if at all, and it kind of improved over time till now. My school, for example, was started off by laborers that collected meager funds and so forth, and it's still around in the modern day and produces graduates, and I'm sitting here as a product of that, as an example.
All the people, whether they were indentured laborers or the poor merchants who came trying to make it big over here, they brought little pieces of their culture with them. And much of the social fabric that we see today, the cultural fabric that we see today, including the conservatism, was pieced together from all of that.
The second, I would say, is piety. When I say piety, I mean religiosity, following your religious texts, family traditions, your family rituals. And I think the third, a very important leg would be family. Getting married and having children is exceptionally important. It's expected, it's a given. If nobody asks, this is how it is. It's not a nuclear family culture, in most cases. Yes, you have an exceptionally tight nuclear family, but your extended family also does have a very big role to play in the upbringing of a child and protection and so forth.
Conservatism has a bad way of playing out insofar as emancipation is concerned. Emancipation of individuals and their choices, their freedoms, and how they want to express themselves. And one of the communities that often faces a lot of flack is the queer community.
We must understand the nuances of coming out as an LGBT Indian. It's an exceptionally complex thing. You must look at it more as a pyramid. So at the base, there are those that deny their sexuality. Above that, there are those that accept their sexuality to themselves only and act on it in private. Then there are those that accept it, tell their friends. Those that accept it tell their nuclear family. Those that accept it to tell their nuclear family and extended family. And at the top, those that accept themselves and tell the nuclear family, the extended family, as well as the community. When I say tell, you don't necessarily tell verbally, but you show, you live openly.
My personal opinion is I think every child that's born after 2000 is going to be gay. This is my opinion. So I was born in Pietermaritzburg, and then my family moved to Escott. It's a little farm. From my dad's side, his dad was a shoemaker. From my mom's side, my granddad, he worked in Escott Butchery. We lived an average life, but it's like not where we have the lavish things, but we have food, shelter, and education. My parents are divorced, so when we moved to Escott, then we was my granny, my auntie, my mom, a lot of women, cheeky women, nice women, polite women, caring. They all have their different personalities, but when you put them together, it's like one big, warm security feature, and they protect you until you are able to protect yourself. That's the kind of woman we had in our family, or have.
Within the Indian community, of course, there are several queer people, but many of them find it very difficult to speak up about themselves. There is a fair bit of backlash because there is a standard to be maintained because of the aspirational aspect of any immigrant community. There's this need to prove a point that we are here, we can do well for ourselves, and we will excel in whatever we do. So a good Indian family should ideally have 2 lawyers, 2 doctors, and ideally in the same person.
My family totally wrote me off. when I was started dating Nirvana. It was a huge thing.
When I reflect back, I realize, yeah, there are times when I had to compromise me, whether it was in my job, whether it was with my family. And yeah, I felt like I deceived myself in many ways.
Consciously, in terms of telling my parents I could be on myself. I was blessed to be financially independent. I had the mental fortitude to go it alone if needed. And maybe that made me a bit cavalier.
There is no recognition for a lesbian couple or a gay couple, even if you had kids.
When I was in Escort, I thought I was the only gay person until I moved to Durban, and then I found somebody here, and then I realized, okay, this one dude is like me, and I thought it was only two of us. And then when he started to take me out and like go places and everything, I was like, damn, there's a whole lot of us over here. It's not just me. And then that's how it is, yeah.
I would only start bringing my partner home when I was comfortable with more than just my family knowing. Because you can't really box news like this. And I haven't experienced or heard anything negative. That being said, and here I'm not speaking about my nuclear family, I'm talking about community, everybody outside the nuclear family. I'm not naive to think that it's all kumbaya.
I've seen a large number of transgendered people. And I went through a phase where I was asking them all, when did they first realize that they were in the wrong body? And almost universally, the answer to that was, I've always been in the wrong body. Our gender identity is a far more fundamental thing about us as human beings. It's the foundation on which your quality of life rests. The important distinction is a lot of people think that this has to do with sex. What we need to understand is your gender defines who you are. Who you have sex with is a completely separate issue. And those two are independent of who you are as a human being. So what we do when we talk about gender affirming processes, and it's not just surgery, it's a whole variety of things. There are psychological changes that need to happen, as well as hormonal changes that can happen. And that is all part of a process.
The community center is primarily a drop-in safe space for individuals that identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or intersex. And of course, individuals that not even identify with those terms sometimes or regard themselves as gender non-conforming. We provide psychosocial support and ultimately link you up with a service provider that might offer you more service than we are able to get it.
In the Western Cape, we have at Reddy more than 300 people waiting for surgery. And those people have been coming to the clinic since 2009, which is when we started it. We have many people in other provinces who have no access to this kind of service in the state health service. The problem is that if you're in the state service, you're going to be waiting for up to 25 years to be able to have that surgery.
I think the tensions that we see in society between what on the one hand the law says and how communities actually function is an interesting paradox of South African society. And for me, as a psychologist, trying to understand paradoxes are so important, because I think we all kind of function in South African society with multiple paradoxes all the time. And I kind of see South Africa as an aspirational society. So, I see our progressive constitution as aspirational, that it certainly does not mirror what South African society currently is.
We've got progressive legislation, a constitution that recognizes one's right to equality on grounds of sex, gender, sexual orientation. With that in mind, in a space and time where crime is as high as it is, especially when it comes to gender-based violence and hate crimes against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. When you look at the demographics of people that have accessed the services of the center over the years, when it comes to psychosocial support, the drop-in is predominantly Black, but the online is amazingly very Indian still.
Homophobia can be a bit of a strong word when we try to neatly box the experiences, negative experiences of LGBT folk within the Indian community. By and large, yes, a lot, I would say the majority of Indian LGBT folk do experience some form of homophobia.
You have a call from someone who's 19 and they call you to say, look, I've just finished my matric. In fact, let me give you a specific case that we had with Peter Respect. 2 young men, beautiful, vibrant, exciting love life. Got found out by the parent of the one partner that actually these are not just 2 best friends, but they are actually in a relationship. What does the dad do? In full view of everybody in the neighborhood, beats them both to the pulse on the pavement outside their own home. So a space that is supposed to be home, a space that is supposed to be safe, a parent that is supposed to be loving, does this to you. And in full view of your community. Now, if a young person calls and that's their experience, it makes it so difficult because we know we can't tell you, be proud of who you are, because you are within a space where you are likely to be disowned, all the liberties that you had gone, and at best kicked out of home. And at worst, given you are not going to even use our surname anymore, it's impractical to advise a young person at 19 about the concept of being, you know what, you're beautiful. You're a young, beautiful Indian lad. You've finished your matric. You've got a whole life ahead of you. It makes it impossible.
So when I see the Indian community in South Africa being so conservative about accepting or even tolerating queer identities, I find it a bit surprising and slightly disheartening because South Africa is a rainbow nation. South African constitution guarantees safety and equality for everyone under its constitutional umbrella. In South Africa, once we come into the apartheid era, Indians come together to form a bloc along with other people of color in general and white allies to start objecting to the apartheid regime.
We have people who every year during the Gandhi Peace Walk are leading the pack, chanting messages of equality, dignity, and freedom for all, saying that peace in our time, not in the future, peace in our time, equality in our time. And yet, when a young person has been violated, newspapers like The Post would hardly report on a violation of a young Indian child. You have a lot of, I don't want to call them celebrities, but champions, stalwarts insofar as championing human rights, justice, equality for all. And yet when it comes to the Indian community, they have not stood up. We've got specific political parties in this province and city that have specifically said we are here to fight for the Indian vote. And the question is, what happens to the diversity of the Indian community? Are you talking about a particular gender expression or a sexual orientation, or you're talking about everyone who is Indian in their totality, in their different expressions of sexual orientation and gender identity, and even when it comes to issues around class? If you are poor and Indian in Durban, you have no rights. If you come from a poor family and you so happen to be gay and violated, accessing justice is almost non-existent. The powers that be are mum.
I think class is really key, because in South Africa, class is linked to location. And when we think about identity, I like to think about place identity, and looking at how place identity can be a pivot around how we think about queer identity. So questions of who we are linked to questions of where we are. And I think it is very different inhabiting a queer identity while being in Phoenix in Durban versus being in Glenwood in Durban, and although they might just be 13 kilometers away, that 13 kilometers might as well be an entire universe away.
I mean, at some point, 2004, we even had a mayor who was deputized by an Indian person, mind you, at the time, who went out to say there are no gay people in Durban. Shocked. Until their minds, until their hearts change, until they break off those chains of doing it for myself and doing it for the community, for even that one individual that really for them is not important, and realizing that when we talk about equality, when we talk about dignity, until we are all free, no one is free.
I understand why my brothers and sisters and so forth wouldn't want to come out or come out in stages. I think it's safer for many folk. There are exceptional practical reasons not to come out.
With that coming out, there's that coming into community. And I think many people don't feel a sense of coming in. And this idea of, I think, family and belonging is quite problematic.
We know very well from a lot of work and a lot of engagement with communities that, especially if you're talking young Indian, gay, lesbian, bisexual individuals, home is where the heart is. Home is where everything is. I can never be who I am if I'm not accepted and loved at home.
When I came out to my family, my mom, when we came back, she was like, we hugged, we cried, and she's like, you will always be my baby. I'm the last born. You will always be my baby. And she said she loved me no matter what or who I am or whatever it is. And I must just be me. And when it came to my aunties, my uncles, my cousins, and everybody, it's like, you're gay. And like, hello, where have you been? We know you are gay. And it's not a problem with us, because with us, it's basically like, you're healthy, good. You got a food, you got a roof over your head, you got a good job, you're living your life, you're okay. That's okay with us. Your sexual preference doesn't really matter to us because you are happy who you are. And they all accepted me.
What does it mean to be South African and Indian and LGBTI? One of the difficulties we see just at a general level is this kind of homogenization of the Indian community, the homogenization of the LGBT community, and then when they intersect, this kind of homogenization of the Indian LGBTI community.
Understanding the trials and tribulations of not just a young Indian person struggling with who am I in the world, but how do I thrive as a young person of a diverse nature. There's not enough research, there's not enough narratives that actually are geared towards empowering one within this space.
Families would rather please their neighbors and not acknowledge, for example, a gay son, than actually embrace, affirm, and accept something that is obviously no fault of anybody, because there's nothing to be ashamed of to begin with. But I think because of the lack of information, knowledge, awareness, and I think the lack of visibility of queer people in general in Indian communities, I think many parents don't know how to even begin to process this information.
It actually is still taboo to be gay, taboo to have HIV. So until those things change, we will continue to be people that are in a space where parents really don't know what best to say, really don't know what else to say, but to feel themselves disempowered to accept and appreciate their own kids in fear of what others will think, using religion, using culture, using class, and whatever else is at their disposal.
For many people, and I think younger people especially, there is this possibility that the Indian community is changing, that there is actually the possibilities of more liberal attitudes, that as we see more visibility both in sitcoms, on television, we begin to realize that in fact aunts and uncles and maybe even grandfathers were actually queer themselves. And maybe that unmarried aunt or uncle, was in fact queer themselves.
We are gay. It's not something we can decide. We can't decide to wake up one morning and say, I'm not going to have a child. We want children. I'm not going to wake up and say, you know what, I don't want a wife to go to in the morning to do this for me, cook for me, and let me go out to work. No, we would have loved to have that, but it's just not our cup of tea. It's just not our cup of tea.
I think you should be true to who you are. And if you realize that you're a lesbian at the age of 12, then, that's who you are, and you need to accept it, and you need to be able to somehow find a platform to be able to say it. No matter what the world throws at you, don't compromise your decision. Don't take decisions to please other people.
Being LGBT Indian is exceptionally different from what we would consider the mainstream or Western version of the LGBT, what we see in the media. It's not as clear-cut. It's not a matter of attending a pride parade and you have your flag, which is all awesome. I really love it, and giving speeches and academic discourses and so forth. It's a very real, raw, lived experience on a daily basis. There's a lot of things that would impact you, your culture, your community.
I think the future needs to be a future that's based on common humanity. We need to really put our humanity first. And I think if we put our humanity first, we might solve a lot of the tensions that we find ourselves constantly swirling in. I hope that I don't have to say the same things in 5 or 10 or 20 years' time. But I imagine I might. But I remain an optimist. So for me, the utopia is always just a day away. So I look forward to that.